The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's diner, casting shifting shadows across the worn vinyl booths. Detective Matt Stone, 53 years old with silver threading through his dark hair, sat alone at his usual table, nursing his third cup of coffee. The badge was gone now, retired 6 months ago after 30 years on the Chicago PD. But the habits remained. The corner booth where he could watch the door. The coffee that had grown cold while his mind wandered to cases that would never be solved. His fingers traced the rim of the ceramic cup, weathered hands bearing the small scars of a lifetime spent dealing with humanity's darker impulses. A knife wound from a domestic call gone wrong. Scraped knuckles from wrestling suspects to the ground. Nothing dramatic like the Hollywood version of police work, just the accumulated wear of 3 decades keeping the peace in a city that sometimes forgot what peace looked like. You planning to buy that coffee, or just rent it? The voice belonged to Sarah Chun, the diner's owner, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room despite everything life had thrown at her. Matt looked up, startled from his reverie. "Sorry, Sarah. Mind was elsewhere." She slid into the booth across from him without invitation, something she'd been doing more frequently since his retirement. Her movements were graceful despite the long hours she spent on her feet, managing a business that barely kept her afloat in a neighborhood that gentrification had forgotten. "Somewhere good, I hope," she said, refilling his cup from the pot she'd brought over. "You've been staring at that rain like it owes you money." Matt chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. Sarah had that effect on him. Drawing out pieces of the man he'd been before the job had worn him down to essential elements. "Just thinking about time. How it moves differently when you're not chasing it anymore." "Must be strange," Sarah observed, settling back against the booth's cracked vinyl. 30 years of structure, of knowing exactly what each day would bring. 28 years, Matt corrected automatically. 2 years undercover don't count the same way. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's diner, casting shifting shadows across the worn vinyl booths. Detective Matt Stone, 53 years old with silver threading through his dark hair, sat alone at his usual table, nursing his third cup of coffee. The badge was gone now, retired 6 months ago after 30 years on the Chicago PD. But the habits remained. The corner booth where he could watch the door. The coffee that had grown cold while his mind wandered to cases that would never be solved. His fingers traced the rim of the ceramic cup, weathered hands bearing the small scars of a lifetime spent dealing with humanity's darker impulses. A knife wound from a domestic call gone wrong. Scraped knuckles from wrestling suspects to the ground. Nothing dramatic like the Hollywood version of police work, just the accumulated wear of 3 decades keeping the peace in a city that sometimes forgot what peace looked like. "You planning to buy that coffee, or just rent it?" The voice belonged to Sarah Chun, the diner's owner, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room despite everything life had thrown at her. Matt looked up, startled from his reverie. "Sorry, Sarah. Mind was elsewhere." She slid into the booth across from him without invitation, something she'd been doing more frequently since his retirement. Her movements were graceful despite the long hours she spent on her feet, managing a business that barely kept her afloat in a neighborhood that gentrification had forgotten. "Somewhere good, I hope," she said, refilling his cup from the pot she'd brought over. "You've been staring at that rain like it owes you money." Matt chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. Sarah had that effect on him. Drawing out pieces of the man he'd been before the job had worn him down to essential elements. "Just thinking about time. How it moves differently when you're not chasing it anymore." "Must be strange," Sarah observed, settling back against the booth's cracked vinyl. 30 years of structure, of knowing exactly what each day would bring. 28 years, Matt corrected automatically. 2 years undercover don't count the same way. Terrifying, he admitted. "For 30 years, I knew who I was." Detective Stone, badge number 2847. "Now I'm just Matt Stone, guy who drinks too much coffee and reads mystery novels where the detective actually solved the case." Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that made something warm unfurl in Matt's chest. "Well, Matt Stone seems like good company. I see him in here every morning, always polite, Always tips well even when he's just drinking coffee. Creature of habit, Matt said, but he was studying Sarah's face, noting the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the small scar above her left eyebrow that he'd never asked about. What about you? Always dreamed of running a diner in Ravenswood. God, no, Sarah laughed again. I used to be a social worker, burned out after 15 years of fighting a system that seemed designed to fail the people it was supposed to help. My ex-husband left me this place in the divorce settlement. Thought he was sticking me with a worthless burden. She gestured around the modest interior with its mismatched chairs and faded photographs of old Chicago. Turns out he was half right about the burden part, but it's not worthless. Not to me. Matt found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. What changed your mind? The people, Sarah said simply. Mrs. Rodriguez comes in every Tuesday for the early bird special and tells me about her grandchildren. Tommy from the auto shop stops by for coffee and complains about his back, but always asks how my daughter's doing in college. You sit here every morning looking like you're carrying the weight of the world, but you always say please and thank you, and you left a $50 tip on Christmas Eve when you thought I wasn't looking. He crept up Matt's neck. You weren't supposed to notice that. I notice everything in my place, Sarah said, her voice gentle. It's a smaller version of what you used to do, I imagine. Watching people, seeing what they need, trying to help when you can. The observation was more accurate than Matt cared to admit. He'd always been good at reading people, at seeing the stories they carried in their posture, their expressions, the things they didn't say. It was what had made him a decent detective, and apparently what made him a regular customer at Murphy's Diner. Can I ask you something? Sarah said, her tone shifting slightly. Shoot, are you happy? With retirement, I mean. You seem. She paused, searching for the right word. Unmoored. Matt was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rain and the distant sound of traffic on Lawrence Avenue. I thought I would be, he finally said. 30 years of dealing with the worst people can do to each other. I was ready to be done with it. Ready for peace and quiet. But peace and quiet turns out to be pretty loud when you're alone with it. The admission surprised him with its honesty. I keep waiting for the phone to ring. Keep checking the news for cases that aren't mine to solve anymore. Sarah nodded, as if this made perfect sense. You know, when I first took over this place, I used to wake up every morning thinking I'd made a terrible mistake. The equipment was ancient. The books were a mess. Half the regulars were convinced I'd ruined their favorite hangout. She traced patterns on the table with her finger. But gradually, I realized I wasn't trying to save the world anymore. Just this little corner of it. This one room where people can sit down, have a decent meal, and feel like somebody gives a damn about them. That doesn't seem small, Matt said. No, Sarah agreed, meeting his eyes. It doesn't. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the rain streak down the windows. Matt found himself studying Sarah's profile, the way she held herself with quiet confidence despite the obvious challenges of running a struggling business. There was something about her that drew him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the diner's ancient heating system. Sarah, he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Yes. Would you maybe like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that's not here, I mean. Somewhere you don't have to work. Sarah's smile was radiant. I thought you'd never ask, Detective Stone. Just Matt, he corrected. Just Matt, she agreed. 3 weeks later, Matt found himself sitting across from Sarah at Antonio's, a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park. She traded her diner uniform for a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Matt had dusted off his one good suit, the one he'd worn to commendations and funerals. I haven't done this in a while, Matt admitted, cutting into his chicken marsala with hands that were steadier on the job than they were navigating the social complexities of middle-aged dating. What, eat Italian food? Sarah teased. Date, Matt said. My ex-wife used to say I was married to the job first and her second. Turns out she wasn't wrong. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. How long were you married? 18 years. Divorced 7 years ago. Matt took a sip of wine, surprised at how easy it was to talk to Sarah about things he usually kept locked away. Her name was Linda. Good woman. Deserved better than a husband who came home every night carrying pieces of other people's worst days. Children? No. The single word carried weight that Sarah seemed to understand without explanation. What about you? You mentioned a daughter. Jessica. She's 21, junior at Northwestern. Pre-med. Sarah's face lit up when she spoke about her daughter. Smart as hell and twice as stubborn. Gets that from her mother. And her father? Sarah's expression darkened slightly. David was complicated. Successful lawyer. Charming when he wanted to be. Also controlling, manipulative, and occasionally violent when things didn't go his way. Matt's detective instincts kicked in automatically. How violent? Nothing I couldn't handle, Sarah said quickly, then caught the look in Matt's eyes. I'm sorry, I know that face. It's the same one you get when you read the crime reports in the Tribune. But David's not your case to solve, Matt. He's in San Francisco with his secretary-turned-second wife. And I'm here. Old habits, Matt admitted. Occupational hazard of spending 3 decades trying to fix things that were broken. Some things can't be fixed, Sarah said gently. Sometimes you just have to move on and build something new. Matt nodded, understanding more than she knew. They were both carrying scars, both trying to figure out how to build a life in the aftermath of things that had ended badly. The evening progressed with the careful dance of 2 people discovering they enjoyed each other's company. Sarah was funny and intelligent, with a dry wit that caught Matt off guard and made him laugh in ways he'd forgotten he could. She told stories about her customers with the same observational skill he'd brought to suspects and witnesses, seeing the humanity in people others might dismiss. Mrs. Kim from the dry cleaner comes in every Thursday, Sarah was saying, gesturing with her fork. Orders the same thing every time. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, coffee black. Never varies. But last week she ordered pancakes and seemed nervous about it. Turns out her granddaughter was visiting from Seoul and had requested American breakfast food. Did she like them? Hated them, Sarah laughed. But she ate every bite because her granddaughter was watching. Next Thursday, she was back to eggs and toast, but she asked me to write down the pancake recipe. Said she wanted to practice making them at home. Matt found himself charmed by the story, by Sarah's obvious affection for her customers and their small dramas. You see people clearly, he observed. Comes with the territory. You can't run a neighborhood place without understanding the neighborhood. Sarah paused, considering her words. I imagine it's similar to police work, in a way. Different stakes, but the same need to read people, to understand what they're not saying as much as what they are. The stakes were definitely different, Matt agreed. Though I'm starting to think maybe the smaller stakes matter more. Mrs. Kim's granddaughter won't remember the taste of those pancakes in 20 years, but she'll remember that her grandmother cared enough to try something new for her. Is that what you miss about the job? Making a difference? Matt considered the question. I used to think I was making a difference. Clean up the streets, lock up the bad guys, protect the innocent. But after 30 years, the same neighborhoods had the same problems, just different faces. The drugs, the violence, the desperation, none of it really changed. Sometimes I wonder if I was just managing chaos instead of preventing it. But you help people, Sarah insisted. Individual people, even if you couldn't fix the whole system. Maybe, Matt said, there were good days. Cases where we got to the victim in time, where we found the missing kid, where we caught the guy before he could hurt anyone else. But the bad days, he trailed off, lost in memories he tried not to revisit. Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her fingers were warm and calloused from years of physical work, and her touch was surprisingly comforting. You don't have to carry all of that alone anymore, she said quietly. Matt looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. There was something in her expression that made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of it. I'm not sure I know how to do anything else, he admitted. Then maybe it's time to learn. Over the following months, Matt found himself learning indeed. Learning to sleep past 6 in the morning. Learning to read books for pleasure instead of scanning for criminal behavior patterns. Learning to laugh at Sarah's stories about difficult customers and eccentric suppliers. Learning to feel something other than the low-level hypervigilance that had defined his adult life. Sarah introduced him to parts of Chicago he'd only ever seen through the filter of police work. They walked through Lincoln Park Zoo on a Tuesday afternoon, watching children press their faces against exhibit glass while their parents tried to manage diaper bags and strollers. They browsed the farmer's market in Lincoln Square, where Sarah knew half the vendors by name and introduced Matt as my friend from the neighborhood. Friend. The word felt both accurate and insufficient. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm of dinners twice a week and long phone conversations that stretched past midnight. Sarah had a way of asking questions that made Matt examine his own assumptions, and he found himself telling her things he'd never shared with Linda, his ex-wife, or anyone else. You know what's strange? Matt said one evening as they walked along the lakefront path. October had painted the trees in brilliant reds and golds, and Lake Michigan stretched endlessly toward the horizon. What's that? I spent 30 years thinking about retirement, planning for it, saving for it. But I never actually imagined what it would feel like. The day-to-day reality of it. And how does it feel? Matt was quiet for a moment, watching a jogger pass by with headphones and determined expression. Different than I expected. Better in some ways. I can actually enjoy a sunset without scanning the area for potential threats. I can have a conversation without mentally categorizing everyone in the room. But Matt smiled at how well Sarah knew him already. But I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. 30 years of expecting the worst makes it hard to believe in good things lasting. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun caught the highlights in her hair, and her expression was serious. Matt, what are you afraid of? The question was direct in a way that caught him off guard. Sarah had a talent for cutting through his deflections and getting to the heart of things. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe that I'm too old to start over. Maybe that I've seen too much ugliness to be good company for someone like you. Maybe that whatever this is between us, I'll find a way to mess it up like I messed up my marriage. Sarah stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume and see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. And maybe, she said softly, you're exactly the right age to start over. Maybe seeing ugliness makes you appreciate beauty more, not less. Maybe this time will be different because you're different. How can you be so sure? I can't, Sarah admitted. But I'm 51 years old, Matt. I've been married to a man who made me feel small and worthless, and I've spent the last 8 years rebuilding my life one day at a time. I know what it feels like to be broken, and I know what it feels like to heal. And I know that what we have is worth the risk. Matt looked into her eyes and saw something there that made his heart race in ways it hadn't in decades. Not just attraction or affection, but recognition. The sense of meeting someone who understood the complexity of starting over at an age when most people assumed the major decisions had already been made. Sarah, he began, but she interrupted him by standing on her tiptoes and kissing him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deeper as Matt's arms came up to circle her waist. When they broke apart, both were breathing slightly harder, and Matt felt something shift inside him. A wall he'd built around his heart cracking open just enough to let in the possibility of hope. Well, Sarah said, her cheeks flushed. That was worth waiting for. Matt laughed, surprising himself with the sound. I was about to say the same thing. They walked back to Sarah's car hand in hand, and Matt found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, 53 wasn't too late for second chances. But the past, as Matt should have known from his years as a detective, has a way of refusing to stay buried. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November, shattering the peaceful routine Matt had built around coffee at Murphy's and afternoon walks with Sarah. He was reading the Tribune when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Stone, he answered automatically, the old habits kicking in before he remembered he wasn't Detective Stone anymore. Matt? It's Captain Rodriguez. Matt straightened in his booth, recognizing the voice of his former commanding officer. Captain, this is unexpected. I need to see you, Matt. Today, if possible. There's a situation. The word sent a familiar chill down Matt's spine. In 30 years of police work, there's a situation never meant anything good. What kind of situation? The kind we can't discuss over the phone. Can you come in? Matt looked around the diner, at Sarah wiping down tables and chatting with the morning regulars, at the simple piece of his retirement routine. I'm retired, Captain. Remember? I remember. But this involves one of your old cases, Matt. The Marchetti investigation. The name hit Matt like a physical blow. Vincent Marchetti. 3 years of his life, countless hours of surveillance, building a case against Chicago's most untouchable crime boss. The case that had ended not with justice, but with technicalities and expensive lawyers and the slow realization that sometimes the system protected the very people it should have stopped. Marchetti's been in federal prison for 2 years, Matt said, though he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Not anymore. He was released last week on appeal. New evidence, questionable search procedures. His lawyers got the conviction overturned. Matt felt the familiar knot forming in his stomach, the tension he'd thought he'd left behind with his badge. What does this have to do with me? He's been asking questions, Matt. About you. About your involvement in the investigation. About where you are now, what you're doing. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Vincent Marchetti wasn't the kind of man who asked questions out of idle curiosity. He was the kind of man who held grudges and had the resources to act on them. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying you should be careful. Very careful. And I'd like to talk to you about some precautions we can take. Matt closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his old life settling back on his shoulders like a familiar, unwanted coat. Across the diner, Sarah caught his eye and smiled, a bright, uncomplicated expression that belonged to the simple world they'd built together. A world that suddenly felt very fragile. I'll be there in an hour, Matt said, ending the call. He sat in the booth for a long moment, staring at his phone, watching his reflection in the black screen. The man looking back at him wasn't the peacefully retired Matt Stone who'd been learning to sleep late and laugh at Sarah's stories. He was Detective Stone again, whether he wanted to be or not. Everything okay? Sarah's voice broke through his reverie. She'd approached the table with her usual coffee pot, but her expression was concerned. Work thing, Matt said, then caught himself. Former work thing. I need to go downtown, talk to some people. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd gotten good at reading Matt's moods, and she could obviously tell this wasn't a casual conversation with old colleagues. Serious work thing? Matt hesitated. He'd been honest with Sarah about most aspects of his police career, but he'd glossed over some of the darker cases, the ones that kept him awake at night, even years later. Marchetti fell firmly into that category. Could be, he said finally. I'll know more after I talk to them. Sarah nodded, but Matt could see the questions she wasn't asking. After 8 years of marriage to a controlling man who'd kept her in the dark about important things, she developed a sensitivity to evasion. Will you call me later? She asked. Let me know you're okay. The concern in her voice made Matt's chest tight. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone worry about him, to have someone who cared whether he came home safely. Of course, he said, standing and leaving money on the table. He paused, then kissed Sarah's cheek, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with diner coffee and frying bacon. I'll call you tonight. But as Matt walked out into the gray November morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving more than just Murphy's Diner behind. The police station felt both familiar and foreign as Matt walked through the lobby 2 hours later. The same scuffed linoleum floors, the same institutional green walls, the same mixture of desperation and bureaucracy that had defined his working life for 3 decades. But now he was a visitor, someone who needed a guest badge and an escort to areas he'd once navigated without thought. Captain Rodriguez looked older than Matt remembered, gray hair thinned to wisps and new lines around his eyes. 28 years of commanding a detective division in Chicago would age anyone prematurely. Matt, thanks for coming. Rodriguez stood and shook hands formally, a gesture that felt strange given their history. Coffee? Sure. Rodriguez poured 2 cups of station coffee, black and bitter enough to strip paint. Matt accepted his cup and settled into the chair across from Rodriguez's desk, noting how the familiar ritual brought back muscle memories of countless briefings and case reviews. Tell me about Marchetti, Matt said without preamble. Rodriguez opened a file folder and spread several photographs across his desk. Matt recognized Vincent Marchetti's face immediately. Heavy features, calculating eyes, the kind of man who wore expensive suits but couldn't hide the violence underneath. Released on appeal 8 days ago. His lawyers found procedural errors in the original investigation, convinced a federal judge that key evidence was obtained illegally. Rodriguez's voice carried the frustration of a career cop watching guilty men walk free on technicalities. What evidence? The warehouse surveillance, the financial record from his nephew's restaurant, the wiretaps from his cousin's phone. Rodriguez ticked off items that Matt remembered vividly. Months of careful work, building a case piece by piece. Those were good seizures, Matt said. We had proper warrants. The warrants were good. But Marchetti's new legal team found irregularities in how some of the evidence was logged and stored. Chain of custody issues, missing signatures, timestamps that didn't match. Rodriguez shrugged. The kind of bureaucratic mistakes that happen in any long investigation, but apparently enough to convince a judge that Marchetti's rights were violated. Matt felt a familiar bitterness rising in his throat. So 3 years of work, dozens of crimes, God knows how many victims. All of it means nothing because someone didn't fill out a form correctly? You know how this works, Matt. Defense attorneys with unlimited budgets can find flaws in any investigation if they look hard enough. What about the other charges? The racketeering, the money laundering? All thrown out with the main conviction. Clean slate. Rodriguez gathered the photographs back into their folder. Marchetti walked out of federal prison last Tuesday like nothing ever happened. Matt stared at the closed folder, remembering late nights spent poring over financial records, surveillance photos, witness statements. Remembering the satisfaction he'd felt when they finally arrested Marchetti at his daughter's wedding. Cuffs hidden under a jacket to avoid ruining the photographs. He said he was asking about me. Rodriguez nodded grimly. We have sources in his organization. Nothing official, but people talk. Word is he's very interested in the detectives who worked his case. Specifically you, since you were the primary investigator. Interested how? Questions about where you live, what you're doing now, who you spend time with. Rodriguez's expression was grave. Vincent Marchetti isn't known for his forgiving nature, Matt. You cost him 3 years of his life and millions in lost revenue. That's not the kind of debt he forgets. Matt felt the walls of the small office closing in around him. For 6 months, he'd been Matt Stone, retired man learning to enjoy civilian life. Suddenly, he was Detective Stone again, with all the baggage that identity carried. What kind of precautions are you talking about? Standard witness protection protocols. New identity, relocation, federal marshals until we can assess the threat level. Witness protection. Matt repeated the words like they tasted bad. Running away and hiding. Staying alive? Rodriguez corrected. Marchetti has resources, Matt. Money, connections, people who owe him favors. If he wants you found, he'll find you. Matt thought about Sarah, about the life they were building together, about Murphy's Diner and morning coffee, and the simple pleasure of walking by the lake without constantly watching for threats. What about the people around me? He asked quietly. If Marchetti's looking for ways to hurt me. Rodriguez's silence was answer enough. Matt drove back to Ravenswood in a daze, his mind cycling between present and past, between the peaceful routine he'd built and the violent world he'd thought he'd left behind. The November sky was gray and threatening snow, matching his mood as he parked outside Murphy's Diner. Sarah was behind the counter, talking to Mrs. Rodriguez about her grandson's piano recital. The normalcy of the scene, the coffee pot percolating, the afternoon regulars reading newspapers, the warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk, felt precious and fragile, like something that could be shattered by a careless word or wrong move. You're back early, Sarah said as Matt slid into his usual booth. How did it go downtown? Matt studied her face, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the small scar above her eyebrow, the silver threads in her brown hair. How could he explain that their quiet happiness was built on a foundation that had just shifted under his feet? Complicated, he said finally. Sarah poured him coffee and settled into the booth across from him. Tell me. And Matt found himself wanting to. The weight of what Rodriguez had told him felt unbearable alone, and Sarah's steady presence made him want to believe that sharing the burden might somehow make it lighter. There was a case I worked a few years ago. He began slowly. An organized crime investigation. We spent 3 years building a case against a man named Vincent Marchetti. Sarah nodded, her expression attentive but not alarmed. Not yet. We got him. Convicted on multiple charges, sentenced to 15 years federal time. Matt took a sip of coffee, buying time. But his lawyers found procedural errors in the investigation. He was released last week. That must be frustrating, Sarah said. Seeing someone you worked hard to convict get off on technicalities. Sarah, Matt said carefully, it's more than frustrating. Marchetti isn't just any criminal. He's dangerous, and he holds grudges. My former captain thinks he might be planning some kind of retaliation against the detectives who investigated him. The understanding dawned slowly in Sarah's eyes. Matt watched her process the implications, saw the exact moment when she realized what this meant for them. How dangerous? She asked quietly. Matt thought about the photos in Marchetti's file, the surveillance footage of him calmly giving orders that resulted in broken bones and disappeared witnesses. The man who'd once ordered a beating for a restaurant owner who'd refused to pay protection money. Very dangerous, Matt said. They sat in silence for a moment, the cheerful sounds of the diner continuing around them. Mrs. Rodriguez finished her coffee and left with a friendly wave. The coffee pot percolated steadily. Life went on, oblivious to the fact that Matt's carefully constructed new world was crumbling. What happens now? Sarah asked. Matt reached across the table and took her hand, holding it carefully as if it were something precious that might break. The police want me to go into witness protection. New identity, new location, federal protection until they can neutralize the threat. How long? They don't know. Could be months, could be years. Could be permanent. Sarah's hand tightened in his. And us. Matt met her eyes, seeing his own pain reflected there. There is no us in witness protection. Sarah, that's the point. I disappear completely. What about what we want? What about the choice to face this together? There is no choice, Matt said, his voice harder than he intended. Sarah, you don't understand what kind of man Marchetti is. He doesn't just kill people who cross him. He destroys their lives piece by piece. Their families, their friends, anyone they care about. So, you're just going to disappear? Leave without fighting. The accusation stung because it touched something Matt had been thinking himself. After 30 years of standing between criminals and their victims, the idea of running felt like cowardice. It's not about fighting, Matt said. It's about keeping you safe. Sarah pulled her hand free and stood up abruptly. Don't you dare make this decision for me, Matt stoned. Don't you dare use protecting me as an excuse to run away from something difficult. Sarah, no. Her voice was firm, carrying the authority of someone who'd rebuilt her life after it fell apart. I spent 8 years married to a man who made all the decisions, who kept me in the dark about anything important because he was protecting me. I won't do it again. Matt felt the conversation slipping away from him, saw the hurt and anger in Sarah's eyes, and realized he was handling this exactly wrong. But 30 years of police work hadn't prepared him for navigating the intersection of love and mortal danger. This is different, he said. This isn't about control. This is about keeping you alive. Is it? Or is it about the fact that getting close to someone means risking something, and you spent so many years protecting yourself that you don't know how to stop? The words hit Matt like a physical blow, cutting through his justifications to something deeper and more uncomfortable. Was Sarah right? Was this about protecting her, or about his own fear of losing something good? I need to think, Sarah said, her voice calmer but no less determined. And you need to decide whether you're ready to trust me enough to face this together, or if you're going to use this as an excuse to go back to being alone. She turned and walked back toward the counter, leaving Matt sitting in the booth with his cooling coffee and the growing certainty that he was about to lose the best thing that had happened to him in years. That night, Matt sat in his small apartment staring at the phone. He tried calling Sarah twice, but both calls had gone to voicemail. Her words echoed in his head. Don't you dare use protecting me as an excuse to run away from something difficult. Was that what he was doing? Running away? Matt walked to his bedroom closet and pulled out a box he hadn't opened in 6 months. Inside were mementos from his police career. Commendations, photographs from department parties, newspaper clippings from high-profile cases. At the bottom was a thick file folder labeled Marchetti Investigation. He carried the folder to his kitchen table and spread its contents under the harsh fluorescent light. 3 years of his life laid out in police reports, surveillance photos, and witness statements. The case that had consumed him, that had cost him his marriage and nearly his sanity. Vincent Marchetti stared back at him from a dozen photographs. At his daughter's wedding, leaving a restaurant in Little Italy, getting into a black Lincoln Town car, always surrounded by associates, always insulated from direct involvement in violence, but always undeniably in control. Matt found himself remembering details he'd tried to forget. The restaurant owner who'd been beaten so badly he needed reconstructive surgery. The dock worker who'd fallen into the Chicago River with concrete blocks tied to his feet. The federal prosecutor who'd received photos of his children at their school playground. This was the man who was now asking questions about Matt's retirement, about where he lived, about who he cared about. And Matt was sitting here debating whether to disappear into witness protection or stay and fight for a relationship that was barely 6 months old. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come to the diner tomorrow morning before we open?" Matt stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I'll be there." Murphy's Diner felt different at 6 in the morning with the lights off and chairs still stacked on most of the tables. Sarah let Matt in through the back door, and they sat at the counter with coffee that she'd brewed in the pre-dawn darkness. "I've been thinking," Sarah said without preamble, "about what you said yesterday, about this Marchetti person, about witness protection." Matt waited, afraid to speak and break whatever fragile understanding they might reach. "You're right that I don't understand the kind of danger you're talking about. I've never dealt with organized crime or professional killers." Sarah's voice was calm, measured. "But I do understand violence, Matt. I lived with it for 8 years. Sarah, let me finish." She held up a hand. "David never hit me in the face. Never left marks where people could see them. But he broke 2 of my ribs once, and my wrist another time. He had a way of making it seem like accidents, like I'd been clumsy or careless." Matt felt rage building in his chest, a familiar anger at men who hurt women, who use their physical strength to control and dominate. "The point is," Sarah continued, "I know what it feels like to live in fear, to walk on eggshells, to second-guess every decision, to be constantly afraid of making the wrong move. And I swore when I left him that I would never live that way again." "This is different," Matt said. "David was one man with anger issues. Marchetti is more dangerous, I know, but the principle is the same." Sarah turned to face him fully. "If I let fear make my decisions, if I let the threat of violence control my life, then I'm back where I was with David. Powerless." Matt studied her face, seeing the determination there, the strength that had carried her through a bad marriage and the challenges of rebuilding her life. But he also saw something that scared him, a willingness to risk everything for the possibility of something better.